In this section, we are going to work on the issue of identifying the damaged psychic organ, which is the next phase of this healing process that we are exploring here. Just as you have physical organs, which allow your body to function properly, the truth is that, as you will see below, there are also psychic organs which determine whether your emotions remain in a state of balance. As you know, a physical organ, like the heart or your lungs, are structures that perform a certain function in your body, and they allow your entire system to maintain a process of homeostasis or balance. When this balance is broken, we are faced with a physical illness. If the heart fails, if it begins to pump more slowly or quickly, as the case may be, your entire body system is altered. The same goes for your lungs, and the same thing happens with your psychic system. There are a series of organs, which I am going to show you below, that fulfill certain functions, and when they fail, they cause that emotional imbalance that you are feeling at this moment. Precisely for this reason, in my consultation, one of the parts of this healing process, which you are undergoing now, consists precisely of helping you identify which organs of your psyche is compromised. There may even be several. We see here the most important ones in your psychic system, and which are the ones that appear the most when I receive queries. And therefore, the question I would ask you be the following. What is the part of your psyche that at this moment you feel that is the most affected by everything you are experiencing? It is your ego, it is your soul, it is your self-state, it is your spirit, it is your heart, it is your unconscious. As you can see, there are several organs of your psyche that I have mentioned here. I am going to show you what each of them consists of, but the purpose of this first part was so that you could become aware of the importance of defining what is really affecting you. A problem of the ego is not the same as a problem of the soul. Therefore, you can already infer that to really heal from a problem of this type, you need to be clear about what is happening to you, the purpose of all this. Now, it could be the case that you were experiencing suffering for various reasons, a polydisease. It could be that you have two systems compromised. That is not a problem, but it implies a greater degree of difficulty when it comes to solving the disease that subjects you to that state of imbalance that you cannot get rid of for now. Let's now go on to define each of these organs of the psyche so that you yourself can discover what affects you. The ego is a system that is related to your ability to enjoy the world in which you live without guilt. Here you could observe the difference that exists between the ego and the spirit. A person with a healthy ego will do what he wants. He will also have the ability to think about his own benefit or convenience, without the perception of others or the particular situation they may be facing, leading them to limit themselves. Of course, the ego must also be in balance. When the ego becomes too relevant in your psychic system, you reach a point where you don't care at all what happens to others. That's where you find selfish people. But a very small ego is also a problem for those who suffer from it. So, the problem you are facing right now may be related to not thinking about your own convenience. Perhaps you give yourself too much to others. Your romantic partner may be someone who always imposes his will on you, and because of his influence, you stop thinking about your own convenience. Therefore, I want you to think in light of what I am revealing to you here. if it is your ego that is suffering, or if, on the contrary, it is another of the psychic organs that we are going to be exploring here. What happens to your soul? You feel that your problems lies there. The soul is a psychic system where your entire essence is located. That is to say, what never changes about yourself. We all have an essence, something that remains unchanged. If you could define a single characteristic of yours that has never changed throughout these years, from when you were a child until now that you are an adult, what would it be? The truth is that people are always changing, but there is a part that, despite this, always remains. The notion of the soul that I am presenting to you here comes from the Greeks, who thought the essence of something is a quality that always remains. That is why for the Greeks, the gods were related to those attributes that are immortal. That is why in the world you can observe beauty, or intelligence, or power, or war. Those were their gods, because they are immortal qualities which have always accompanied humanity since the beginning of the world. Therefore, here it is about being able to think about whether your immortal quality, because your soul is immortal, has begun to fade in recent times because of some people or situations that you face in your daily life. An example of this was a case that I had years ago where a person suffered neurosis because his soul had been blocked. He was a very studious man, and due to the circumstances of his life, he was forced to work in places where that he didn't like being there, because they weren't compatible with his essence. What happened? He became sick of his soul, which had been blocked. He was only healed when he consulted me, when he could observe how the job he had at that moment was killing precisely that part of his psyche. Therefore, I ask you the question again. Do you feel that it is your soul that is suffering? The self-state is a psychic system where confidence in who you are is located. Here, you will find everything that has to do with your personality and the different personalities that you can apply depending on the circumstances you live in. Because you must keep in mind that unlike what happens with your soul, the self-state is flexible. That is why they are differentiated systems. But what if you reached a point in your life where you are always doubting about who you are? For example, you have one personality type, but your romantic partner forces you to act differently. Or you might transfer a self-state which you should apply in a specific circumstance to a situation in which that self-state should not manifest. For example, there are people who, when they are with their children, transform into another child. They leave aside their parents' self-state. I am referring to those adults who argue with their children and who expresses their own emotions when it is the child who is throwing a tantrum, for example. That's obviously going to have an effect on the son. That is why we have so many problems in adults today, precisely because at an unconscious level for many years, they were raised by children and not by parents. So, do you feel that you have a problem related to your self-state? In the sense that you don't know how to activate it and how to control it and apply it in the most appropriate circumstances for you? Here we are simply seeing where the problem is. Remember that each of these psychic organs has its particular therapy. You have a problem associated with your spirit, which is the part of your psyche that allows you to have a balanced relationship with the divine, whatever you believe in. Beyond this factor, the truth is that the spirit has a very relevant influence on the motivation you might have to meet your life goals. because it is directly related to the meaning you give to your existence. When a person has a low spiritual level, he immediately loses his desire to move forward because he doesn't see any sense in what he is experiencing. You might be going through a phase of demotivation, demoralization, which prevents you from feeling the desire or hope that at some point in your life you will be happy. Now, what causes this? In general, people who have a low spiritual level have lived for many years in the company of people who demoralize them. There are people who are responsible for killing your spirit over the years. A toxic partner or parents who are always subjecting you to abuse because they themselves do not have spiritual strength cause that when the patient reaches his adult age, he somatizes all spiritual illness because he were not exposed to strengthening that part of their psyche, which is an aspect that is worked on in this therapy. Do you feel that your problems has to do with this? That your spirit, your motivation, your hope has been lost because of that toxic partner or people who have interacted with you? On the other hand, it could happen that your problem is located in your heart, which is the organ of your psyche that is responsible for generating emotional ties toward other people. All those who suffer from a relationship breakup or romantic disappointment experience some of the diseases associated with the heart. For example, your heart could break into pieces, or you could feel like it shrinks when you think about or suffer some type of trauma in relation to the emotional bond you have with another person who is important to you. To give just two examples of many others that exist, if your psychic heart becomes sick, you will be limited in the generation of psychic energy throughout your system. So, if you have been suffering from some type of contraction or pain in your chest for a long time, but it has no physical explanation, you are clearly facing an imbalance in your psychic heart. Some of my clients undergo EKGs and have excellent results. They are completely healthy, but still they continue to suffer in their chest and somatize the same symptoms they did good experience due to heart disease, despite, as I mentioned, they do not suffer from anything on a physical level. As you can see, here the problem is of a psychic nature that is associated with the trauma that you experienced due to that broken bond that you suffered at the moment in which you suffered that disappointment that led you to feel like your heart was breaking, among other sensations that come with all this. Therefore, do you feel that this is what you are experiencing at this moment? Another problem that you could suffer is related to your self-esteem, which is the part of your psychic system that is responsible for making you perceive your personal value and the evaluation that others have of you. You would be surprised at the number of people I have treated who felt ugly from a psychic point of view, even though they were very attractive physically. But what happened? Because of a bad relationship or toxic parents, these people grew up believing that they were not as valuable as they were in reality. In fact, I had a case of a high performance athlete who had achieved several important sporting achievements, and yet, despite all that, he did not feel like he was successful. It's a paradox, but it happens that there are people who start seeing their personal value either because other people treat them badly or because they themselves have blocked their ability to validate themselves. Do you feel like this is what's happening to you? That you no longer know how to define your own value? That you no longer feel like someone successful? If this is your case, you must adjust that part of your psychic system precisely so that you regain the balance that you have lost. And finally, your problem could be related to your unconscious. This is already part of a psychoanalytic type therapy. The unconscious is a space in your psyche where all the traumas and complexes are located that under certain conditions are activated and that lead you to carry out actions on autopilot, as I call it. You perform actions that have no explanation for you and that you would on them under normal circumstances, but you cannot avoid doing them. Many people enter into relationships with other people who they are not even physically attracted to, but why do they do it? Precisely because it is the unconscious that leads them to choose those partners. For example, some people unknowingly choose their lost father or mother because they want to project into their relationships the love, affection, and protection that they did not have in their childhood. There are people who make important life decisions through their unconscious, which leads them to do so. For example, I had the case of a client who was very talented in music. He liked to play drums, he had been recruited by a band, and he did not accept, although he wanted to do it, because he dedicated himself to working in a bank. Because his mother, since he was a child, she always told him that he had to be a banker, so as not to be a failure like his father had been, for having dedicated himself to music. And what happened? As the years went by, this client of mine suffered neurosis because he felt frustrated with the life he was leading. Then, you might be suffering from a disease of this type, that you make decisions without having control of them. As you can see, recognizing the psychic organ that is being affected by some illness of the psyche due to an emotional trauma is very important because this allows you to develop the most effective treatments so that you can heal from what is affecting to you. In the next section, we are going to see some of these treatments, although, as you already know, the healing of each of these organs arises from a specific therapy for each of them.